Welcome to Messy Conversations, everyone. We'll get started in just a few seconds. Give a few more people a chance to find their seats. Well, again, welcome to Messy Conversations. We're really glad to have you here today. We're continuing to celebrate Black History Month. And today, Judge Quander is rejoining us. He was here a couple months ago, month or two ago, to talk about the Divine Nine. And he'll be joining us with Clarence Williams to talk about Black family history. So we're glad that you joined us for that. A couple of quick announcements. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Clarence also put together a terrific messy conversation last week on Black music as activism. If you didn't see that, it's on YouTube. You can see it there. Apparently, Kendrick Lamar saw it and behaved accordingly. So thank you for that. Um, what else we got? We'll be off next week because of President's Day. We'll return on the 24th with LaCoya Jassess, excuse me, and Tony Odom with a terrific topic. They're going to be talking about Afro-womanism and Black feminism. So please come back and join us for that. Bring a friend with you. And then one other quick announcement, since we're going to be off next week, coming up on the 13th, of course, is Black Love Day. So keep that in mind. And it's also the anniversary of Lucille Clifton's death. She died back in 2010 on Black Love Day. What are the chances? As always, please keep yourself muted until you're called upon to join the conversation, but we want you in the conversation. So utilize the chat. Put any questions, comments, or just say, hey, I want in the conversation, whatever you need to do in the chat, and we'll get to you shortly. And with that, I'll hand things off to Clarence.
Thank you, David. Yes, I am indeed Clarence R. Williams, the student representative for the Messy Conversation Planning Committee. And I just want to remind everyone that yes, this is Black History Month. And yes, we at Antioch will be observing Black History Month, even though the federal government says that there will be no observances in any federal buildings. Thankfully, we're not a federal organization, and therefore, Black history is celebrated here because Black history is American history. American history is Black history. And today I'm really honored that we will be talking about one of the origin stories of a very storied family today. What you've just heard, Lift Every Voice and Sing, for those who do not know, but that was the Howard Gospel Choir, Howard University, which I wanted to pay homage not only to a historical Black college, but also to laud our conversationist today, who is not only a undergraduate alum, but is also a graduate student alum there, as he received both his undergraduate degree and his Jewish prudence degree there as well. So today I'm honored to welcome back to talk about a storied Black family, Rohulamin Quander, who is a retired judge in Washington, D.C. On our flyer, it actually said the Quander family of Washington, D.C., but it's also looked upon as being part of the DMV, which is the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. And the Quanders certainly are in all of those districts. So, welcome back, Rohulamin Quander, who was with us for our discussion on the Divine Nine, which he is indeed a proud Omega Sci Fi member. He's written a book about it, and he's also penned three other books, largely around his family, starting with his father, around a medical issue, and his contributions to the medical research around diabetes, and a second book around his cousin, Nellie Quander, who was the first president of the AKA sorority. And last but certainly not least, is his book on the Quanders, which we are happy to highlight today and encourage those of us who would like to learn more to certainly, you know, secure a copy and learn further items and factoids we won't get to today. But welcome back, Rohulamin Quander. I'm going to call you Ro, if you don't mind.
That's fine. That's fine.
I think that I've earned that right. Full disclosure, I ran Ro's first political campaign in Washington, D.C. I didn't make him win, but it led the way to his political steps thereafter, thanks to his wife, Carmen, who she and I worked on the first elected mayor of Washington, D.C.'s political campaign, Walter E. Washington. So that's our backstory. So let's get into the Quander backstory.
Yeah. Well,
Starting with, I'm
go ahead.
sorry, Rob, go ahead.
Uh, when you said that I didn't win, yes, I did win, but in a different context. I came in second, but of course, unless you're playing horseshoes or hand grenades, second doesn't get it. But I got a call from the mayor who offered me a position on the Board of Higher Education as a result of my running for the DC school board and coming in second. And then when I went right on the Board of Higher Education, they elected me chair. So I was a chair of higher education for the District of Columbia for 5 years. So yes, indeed, it was a win situation.
Okay, well, then I'll put that in my memoirs then that we actually did win.
Yeah.
But since we are an institution of higher learning, I'd like to start out asking you, as a family historian for the Quander family, I know how difficult it could be in research, and we here at Antioch, we are consumed with research. So, could you just share with us the steps you took to research the Quanda family? Because I do know that there was no Ancestry.com, there was no 23andMe. And, as much as we love Dr. Henry Louis Gates, there was no PBS in those days. that you could plug into and easily assess, or access, a family origin of any sorts that, was an African American family anyway.
Well, that's a very good question. I'm going to ask Asa, who is our technician, to put up the slide. This is not a PowerPoint, but I have some key slides that I think are integral parts to tell the story. Yes, absolutely. The Quander story, in terms of documenting, preserving the Quander story, and telling the story, is from the old school in terms of techniques, what I like to call the blood, sweat, and tears of how one gets it done. I was at Howard University in particular, and I went to my first Quander family reunion. That was in 1968. And I knew that the family had a reunion. I'd never been, and we have the Maryland Quanders, who are predominantly Maryland, D.C. We have the Virginia Quanders, who are predominantly Virginia, obviously, and groups up to Pennsylvania. It was the same family, but different branches, because of the fact that the family had been here since the 1670s for sure, or full documentation from the 1680s. As time goes on, everybody's not your first cousin. You're still related. So I went to my first family reunion, and I was bitten by the history bug. And being a student in law school, I had developed some skills relative to research, cross-reference, verification, documentation. And I just made it a hobby, so to speak. They were talking about cousin so-and-so and aunt so-and-so and people I had heard of and in many cases never heard of. So I decided I just wanted to find out more. So I ended up taking some time away from my studies and going down to the Hall of Records in Maryland, in Anacostia, not Anacostia, excuse me, in Annapolis, the Hall of Records, and seeing what records I could pull out, old records that were dusty in some cases. Fortunately, a lot of it had been preserved and so it could be documented. I did the same thing with the Fairfax County, Virginia archives, which is in the courthouse. And this began to introduce me to a lot of the history, to find out that some of the things that I'd heard in general were indeed true, and there was a lot more detail to it. So I got into that and was able to pique the interest of other family members, because a lot of them were talking about it, but they hadn't done any research. So it was very important to be able to verify, to clarify, and unfortunately, in some cases, to not be able to, some of the things that had been passed down, whether they were actually true or not. But you don't know unless you look. There was no internet, as you said, no cell phone, hardly any computers. So this was the blood, sweat, and tears down in the dungeon with a magnifying glass and in dusty records in some cases. But it was a very, very inspirational, and has created inside of me a desire to go forward. And I created the Quander Historical and Educational Society, a 501c3 organization that allows me as a historian to share my knowledge of African American history and history in general in the metropolitan area. And I have been doing this for many, many years. And now that I'm a retired senior administrative law judge, this is my second career.
So, Ro, you mentioned that you started out with the records. I mean, the courthouse records. I know that from my own family, in doing the research, because most Black people who came here off those ships who became, enslaved people, they were not put down in those records as human beings. They were generally logged in as like cattle or like property. So they didn't have names there. So when you say, documenting and affirming information, much of our culture has been passed down orally. So when an older relative who may have been in their 80s or 90s, or in my case, 105 for some relatives, you had to often carry that word because it was undocumentable, because those records were not present, records were not attainable. And I know that in our search for my family, I'm told that the Mormon Church has probably the most up-to-date records, prior to the Henry Gates of the world getting into ancestry research. I just wondered, because we were not allowed in the early days of the enslavement period to, to read, to write, it was unlawful. So, in documenting your story, did you hold true those oral stories as well? Or did you discount them simply because you could not find information or documentation to affirm those facts?
A combination of both. Many of the oral stories we did hold true. Some of the oral stories are still around, but we can't verify them, or there's nobody to give us any more detail on it. And of course, a lot of that has gotten lost, but I tried to preserve as much as I could in writing, not only in my book on the Quander family, but in other documents as I have written from time to time. But we had a certain uniqueness because we were here so very early. We managed to hold on to remnants of our name. And you didn't ask it, but it's a very good story that goes with it, because you see the name Quander. People don't know that name. They say, where does that come from? That's not your traditional American name. It's not Smith Jones or from somewhere in Europe or even Latin, from Latin America or the Caribbean.
And
And
I was going to get to that because
yes,
Dr. Lane Parker Gills, who's also present, she often reminds us that Black history did not start once the enslaved people came here on the shore, but they started in Africa. So, could you relate to us about the early origins of your family being in Africa
well,
and
gladly.
coming?
Yeah. Well, I've been to Africa 7 times, might be going 8 next year, not sure. But when I was at Howard University, as a student, 17 years old, and I was in an international club and other organizations on campus. And as I met several students from West Africa, they would call me Quando, and I ignored it. But after this happened about 4 or 5 times, I said to one of the students, the name is Quander. And he said to me, you don't know the origin of your name, do you? And of course, I was by then, I might have been 18. I said, well, what do you mean? He says, we know that name, or something like that. That name came from Ghana, West Africa, and that part of the world. And I didn't know that. I hadn't heard that before. And I spoke to a couple of older relatives who since passed away. And one of the ladies I was talking to, I asked her about the name Quando. She said, oh, yeah, back there somewhere, pointing over her shoulder, very nondescript, indefinite. The name used to be Quando, but we think maybe a census taker or something made a mistake. And it was interesting because that was just an off the cuff remark. And lo and behold, when I got into some of this research, now I hadn't gone to law school yet, got into some of the research years later, still at Howard University, working on my Juris Doctor degree. I ran across the name in the 1800 census. And not only did I run across it in the 1800 census, I ran across it further research when I got into some wills and records, and I discovered a will written by an enslaver who was Henry Adams from Ireland, England, and he had referenced the eventual freedom of 2 of his 4 enslaved, and one of them was named Henry Quando. Now, Henry Adams obviously gave him his own first name, Q-U-A.
Well, I think
Yeah,
that
let's go
Asa
to the
has a
next slide.
slide with the delineation
Yeah,
of
let's
your
go to the
family's
next slide.
name.
Yeah,
If you'll
that will
drop that
explain it.
in,
Yeah, it
there you
explains a
go.
lot more. So here we are at the name Quanda in red. So when I started talking to some other students, not the same one, but some other students, they said, well, we know that name is usually a prefix that goes with it. I said, what do you mean? And when they started pointing out Ghana as the most likely place in the Akan language, and a couple of the students told me that name was known in Ghana. And as I did research, before I went to Ghana, and as I got to plan to go there, and when I went there and met with several people, some of whom were of that same name derivation, I discovered that the name had a history going back. They generically talk themselves back to about the year 900, although these agree as they don't have that in writing. There's probably something in writing, but I didn't see it. And they showed me various derivations of it. Amquando, as you see there, Amaquando, Amuquando, that's all the same name. Aquanda, Quando as we have it, Quando with an E. And as we believe, it migrated to Amquando at the top. And when we think, we can't prove it, that when the original forebear was asked his name, he didn't speak English and they didn't speak the Archon languages of West Africa. I'm Quando. I am Quando. As you see it right there at the bottom. And that name, Quando, Quando, shows up in the records in the 1670s and 80s, all the way up into about 1800. And then it migrated. We believe a census taker maybe dropped the O and made ER, and it's been Quander ever since. So this is how we are today recognized with our name of Quander. And it is of African Fanti origin, and it is from West Africa. It is predominantly known in Ghana. Even today in Ghana, because the language was not originally written, it is now. There are people there in Ghana who spell their name QU, because when the English took over and did the writing of the language, they didn't know the qua of KW is the same as the qua of QU. So consequently, the name is spelled in Ghana both with the KW and the QU, but it is the same basic family and history that goes with it. And so,
What's really interesting, Ro,
Mhm.
is that most enslaved people, at least in the 1600s, they carried the last name of the slaveholder. So it's really unique that your family was able to carry that name forward from Africa. Can you kind of like fill in for me at least how you were able to do that, or do you know how you were able to maintain that as a last name?
Well, I'm inclined, I don't know for sure, but I'm inclined to think there are a couple of reasons. One is that we came very early. We weren't here in 1619. We were definitely here in the 1670s. And we don't know, we haven't found a record prior to the 1670s, whether we were here in the 50s, 1650s, 1660s, we just don't know. But the institution of enslavement had not formalized as it's structured later on. And so we will assume that the enslaver, Henry Adams, who gave his enslaved his name of Henry, recognized and didn't try to change that name. So they held on to the name. And as the generations came forth, children, grandchildren, etc., the name persevered. And so we were able to hold on to our name. Now we have other branches of the family that may have lost it that we don't know about. But this was a rather unique situation. And I think the next slide will help us to have a little bit of understanding. As the family progressed, Mr. Adams wrote his last will and testament in 1684. I mentioned that we've already referenced some documents in the 1670s. And in his will, Henry Adams planned for and provided for the eventual freedom of two of his foreign slaves. And he mentioned them by name, Henry Quando and a woman named Margaret Pugg, P-U-G-G. And he wrote that will in 1684. He died in 1686. And they got their freedom in 1686. Now, they were in service to him, presumably had no assets of anything to speak of, at least. But in the will, he provided for them some instruments along with manumission. They were all related to farming, farm tools particularly. And he said in a trunk and everything in it, even though it didn't enumerate what it was. But he also gave them a cow. So this presumably, hopefully, was the milking cow. But Henry was very industrious, and Margaret too. And they went from a situation where they were in service to Mr. Adams to a position where they were, shall we say, cast out, probably little or no education, but they were determined to make it. And this is where we find the first element of the Quander family transitioning to uncompensated labor, to beginning to have some compensated labor on their own behalf. Now, what they did, of course, was farming. How do we know this? Because Henry, being industrious, I assume, on his own, 1686, where was he between 1686 and 1695, that 9-year period? In 1695, he was able to acquire a tract of land on a lease for 99 years. And then he had been farming. He had been doing compensated labor for himself and his family and had earned some money that he was able to get a tract of land from the Wheeler family, which is a local family here. And that land came from King Charles II a couple of generations before, King of England. So we see
Was this in,
first,
I'm sorry, was this in Virginia or Maryland?
I didn't say, I'm sorry. It was in Maryland, in Charles County, Maryland,
Okay.
just south of Washington, D.C. Prince George's County hadn't been created yet. The whole thing was Charles County in the Maryland colony. Prince George's County was created the year after in 1696. So the family's presence was established in Charles County, Maryland, and the tract of land was there in Maryland. And they farmed that land all the way up until I don't know when, but they were holding it all the way up for the next 50 or so years. And then it kind of disappeared out of their control. But they were industrious and they were working for themselves, and they demonstrated the commitment they had to being industrious. And so they went from farmers to also entrepreneurs because they became shopkeepers, and their records are inventory. When Henry Quando's son or grandson, it's not clear which one, died, the inventory reflected the implements of his shopkeeping. So we know that he was a shopkeeper, and it also implements of carpentry, because we have court records that show that they were doing compensated labor in carpentry and constructing a couple of projects for other parties. So the family's industriousness and going from uncompensated to compensated labor was very, very important. And here we are just as the 1740s, and already the family has established itself with some degree of independence.
I want to be messy for a moment and just to say it was mighty generous of them to give them the tract of 90 plus acres of land, because that's unusual for any family. I know with my family, my forebears had to buy their land acre at a time, but I'm just very curious to get a little messy. Was there any intermarrying perhaps happening there
Well,
to fund that generosity?
no, there was no intermarriage, but that's a messy
I shouldn't say marriage. I'm sorry, appropriation.
Yeah, because along the way, Henry Quando, there's at least three of them, grandfather, father, and son. Along the way, the father had three daughters, and all three of the daughters, the records reflect that they had children outside of marriage. And all of the children, apparently, I can't say all, I say it appears that at least two of them were by white men. And of course, there was no marriage, but the children were born, and the punishment for having a child out of wedlock was to be lashed. And two of the wives, women rather, were severely punished for having children out of wedlock by white men. How do I know they were white? They didn't say they were white, but the records unceremoniously referred to them as mulatto bastards. And it talked about having babies without being married. So it's interesting, the men had to pay a fine, but the women were physically punished for this. So that's not the same land. The land was being farmed, and they were paying taxes on it. The court cases reflect they were having some difficulty meeting their tax obligations, but they still met them. And so that's part of the legacy that we have, where we find out that we were standing up, speaking out for ourselves. And even when we lost sometimes, we have a record left upon which to build some recognition of their strength.
So now that was in Maryland. How did your family make their way to Mount Vernon?
Okay, well, we kind of made our way over to Mount Vernon, and I guess we can go ahead and go to the next slide, if you will. The family started out in Maryland, and of course, at this point, for those of you out and wherever you are, I know a lot of you are in California, but we are in a tri-jurisdiction area. We can stand in D.C., look across the street to Maryland, and if the hill is high enough, we're looking at Virginia. So exactly how Charles Quander ended up on the Virginia side was later. We don't know exactly. But the part about George Washington being able to throw a stone across the river from the Maryland to the Virginia side is not true, but almost true in terms of closeness. So what happened is that as the family expanded, we have that group that got their freedom, but the story is of another brother who was owned by, if you can't own anybody, but enslaved by a different master. And they did not get their freedom as early, and they began to show up later through emancipation. Some of them got their freedom earlier. But on the Virginia side, George Washington, who of course is the father of our nation, he inherited Mount Vernon through his brother, and he moved there in 1758 and 59 with his new bride, Martha Washington. And he had his first enslaved people when he was only 11 years old. And when he married Martha Washington and came to Mount Vernon, there was an inventory of enslaved people there. And then she brought more with her dower. And in that group was a woman named Suki Bay. And Suki Bay was then a young woman. And she had later children, three children at least, more than that, but we know of at least three. And when George Washington provided for freedom under his will, he postponed the immediate opportunity to leave. But when he died in 1799, they knew they were going to get free. And Nancy Carter, who was one of Suki Bay's children, married very shortly after that Charles Quander, free black man. We don't know exactly where he came from in Maryland or Virginia, but the name Quander was almost immediately introduced to George Washington's Mount Vernon plantation right at that time. And that connection created a lasting visibility of the Quander family as connected to George Washington. While it is not admitted, it is largely believed that the Quander family is related to George Washington through Bushrod Washington, who was George Washington's nephew, because he is believed to be the father of West Ford, an enslaved man who got his freedom at Mount Vernon. And West Ford is absolutely known and verified as the ancestor of that entire line of the Quander family. And that labor that the family was indulging in on that side, because of the connection to George Washington and Mount Vernon plantation itself, gave a very high visibility in the local community to say slavery nonetheless, but some of us are more equal than others, if you want to call it that. And one of those descendants, a very prominent one, there were many very prominent descendants indeed, was Nellie Quander. And why she is so important, you see it right there. And that's a portrait that my wife, who's a professional artist, painted. And that is the cover of my book on Nellie Quander. She is such an important person throughout not just the Quander family, but American history, an unsung heroine, if you will. The New York Times did a major story that included her as one of the leading suffragettes that had a lot to do with the eventual getting of the women's right and the 19th Amendment effective in 1920. Nellie Quander, beyond being the first national president of Alpha Kappa Alpha, she made her mark in labor. And I'm not putting it in exact order, but she taught for 50 years in the D.C. school system. But among the many things she did, when World War I came, she was a woman in her 40s. She was pulled out of the D.C. school system by Alice Dunbar Nelson, by then the widow of Paul Laurence Dunbar, and sent to Detroit. Why was she sent there? Because the war effort is going on, and they knew she was a great organizer and said, we want you to go to Detroit, and here's your assignment. You want to monitor the working and labor conditions, the pay, the health, the food, the living, the accommodations, the working conditions of Negro and girls and women. And this is 1917, 1918. And this is to make sure that they are getting fair treatment. And they took her, and she came out of the school system and went to Detroit to do that. It was labor. She came back.
I'm really curious, Ro.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A lot of families did not have access to education. How did members of your family move into the rim and access education post-slavery?
Well, both in Washington, or both, it's actually in Washington, Maryland, and Virginia, particularly D.C. and Virginia. The family has from generation with a lot of determination, a lot of focus, coming from the fact that they had that privilege privilege of having come through, known as connected to George Washington. We went from laborers, common laborers digging ditches, to the next generation being in the house, maybe cooking and driving carriages, to somebody becoming a bookkeeper. And then the first group, I may not know this, but the first high school, or all academic high school in the United States for Blacks, was in Washington, called the Preparatory High School for Colored Youth, later called the M Street, M as in Massachusetts, M Street School. It was located on M Street, and then it became known as Dunbar, Paul Laurence Dunbar. The Quander family started going there, coming through the D.C. school system in the 1860s, and graduating from the M Street School. Nellie Quander graduated from the M Street School class of 1898. It was changed the name to Dunbar in 1916. So they came with a certain amount of experience and advantages that wasn't given to them. We have a long history of self-help within the family and across families. There are other families here in the greater Washington, D.C. area that had parallel histories. Many of them, incidentally, were connected to former presidents as their children by their enslaved. We have the people here who are connected, not only to the Washingtons, but to well, Robert E. Lee wasn't the president, but with the Lees, the Jeffersons, the Madisons, and a lot of their families knew each other, in some cases even intermarried. But these were advantages that were able to take. But more importantly, or most importantly, to understand that these people all had a sense of duty. They had a sense that we must lift others as we climb. And Nellie Quander's whole legacy of labor and helping other people, and studying in labor movement in Germany, and going to Switzerland to get a secondary degree in labor, and then coming back to Washington and working with Carter G. Woodson, and her sister, Nellie Susie, was the secretary of the Association of Negro Life and History for 12 years. And the labor movement, there's a number of papers written on labor issues that were sent to Carter G. Woodson's residence, to Nellie Quander, care of that address. And it turns out to be Carter G. Woodson's address, 1538 9th Street Northwest. So she continued. And then after she taught for 50 years, then she created the...
Ro, let me just, for the benefit of the audience,
Okay.
let me just let you know, audience, that Carter G. Woodson was the initiator or the founder of Negro History Week, which became, as we know it to be today, Black History Month. So,
yes. Well, I'll tell you
just
what,
to
I do
throw
have a
that in.
slide there. So Asa, why don't you skip over to the Carter G. Woodson slide? Let me talk about that. There it is. Right here in Washington, D.C., we just came out of a period last year, after 2024. The M Street School Foundation, which is next to the Dunbar building, they created a foundation. And last year, they didn't create it last year, foundation's been a while. But the project, they picked out 6 people who were historically connected to the M Street School, and they picked 6 contemporary current people and paired them together and made a poster series that is going to continue this year. Next year, it's going to go for several years, to honor the legacy and the growing community of building futures together. And I was indeed honored that they selected me and paired me with Carter G. Woodson, who is the one who founded what we call Negro History Week today. He founded that in 1926. When he saw the need for that to be done, and he asked the brothers of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, his fraternity, my fraternity, in 1920, if they would help him, and they said yes. So they got started. It was a little bumpy at first, but from 1926, without stop, that has been going on every year. And I am just so honored that I had the opportunity to share this legacy. And now, of course, in 2025, we're talking about labor, because the whole history of our people, African-American history and culture, has been important for how much entrepreneurship we have demonstrated, how we have lifted ourselves up. And oftentimes we're by our own bootstraps, even when we didn't have boots. Where there's a will, we've found a way. And so even though he was much younger in that picture than I am now, that is the poster that widely circulated all over the District of Columbia and other places. And so this is important. And if I may mention, go ahead, Clarence. You're muted. You're muted. You've muted yourself. We can't hear you. Well, he's trying to unmute himself. I was going to
No, I'm sorry. What happened was I thought I was a host, but I'm not a host, so it wouldn't let me unmute myself. But anyway, sorry about that, guys. What I was getting to was Carter G. Woodson actually started Negro History Week in order to bring about the importance and the actual historical achievements of Negro people to try to raise the image of the Negro in America.
Right.
And in doing so, I just want to ask you, Ro, about the Quander family. There's so many areas of our history, so many different professions that you guys have really achieved in. So, for the sake of time, I would love for you to just do a few brushstrokes of some of those
Okay.
areas, like the military, starting from even George Washington's time and before, all the way
Okay.
up to the present. If you can briefly do that before we open up the space
Okay.
for further questions.
Asa, bring up the slide of the Tuskegee Airmen. Now, we have a very, very storied history. The Quander family, I'll tell you right now, is the only African-American family in the United States. It may be the only family in the United States who have 4 generals. And we have 4 generals, 3 of whom went to West Point. And of those 3 generals, 2 of them were commandants, and there have only been 3 black commandants at West Point. The commandant is the number 2 man who's in charge of all of the cadets. And the second black commandant was General Leo Brooks. His mother was a Quander, Leo Brooks Jr. He was the second black commandant, and the third black commandant is General Mark Quander. In addition to that, we have 2 Tuskegee Airmen, and the one on the right is Charles Quander. Charles Quander there in front of his B-25 with some fellow Tuskegee Airmen. We have at least one who carried the guidon flag, John Pearson Quander, Nellie Quander's father, in the Civil War. And we have several Quanders like Helen Quander right now with the movie 6888. We have 2 Quanders who were 6888 who were dealing in World War II in Europe with the mail to get the mail delivered. And we have many, the time does not permit, who have served admirably in different positions in which we have defended this nation in war and we have represented this nation in peace. In addition to that, my father was a deacon in the Catholic Church. For those of you who don't know, Catholic Church did not have deacons after the year 1100. They cut them out and put them back in the 1960s. The very first group ordained in the United States in 1971, there were 16 of them, and my father was one of the 16. And he assisted the Pope, 2 different popes, Pope Paul and Pope Benedict, in the assistance of Mass. One of my cousins, Dr. Joseph Quander, he was the first black doctor on the faculty of the University of Texas Medical School. The chief deputy mayor, not chief deputy mayor, but deputy mayor, who was Paul Quander, and the chief deputy fire chief in Washington, D.C. was Joseph Quander. So we have a long sustained history where many of us, more than I can accommodate at this moment, have served our nation in war and in peace. And it's such an honor to be able to sit here this evening and give you a quick overview. That time doesn't permit to go into more detail. Of course, my book, The Quanders in 1684, Enduring Afro-American Legacy, you put in the chat how they can inquire and acquire. Put it in the chat, very simple email, auraquander@aol.com. And if you write and ask for an order form, auraquander@aol.com, I'll send you an order form, very easy, and you'll be able to get a lot more detail about what we have done.
I believe we have placed the book information on our website. I know we had it in our LibGuide before we transferred to our very new website, but it should be living there, I believe, as well. But going back to your last conversation about your father and the Catholic Church, most enslaved people had to worship whatever their slaveholders worship. So it's really interesting that your family was in a large part of the Catholic faith, because a lot of different southern states did not have Catholic churches.
Well, is that a question or a statement? You want me to follow
Well,
up
it's a
again?
statement, but it's also interesting. I was baiting you to tell us that about the state of Maryland becoming largely a Catholic-centered colony. That's
That's
what I was
true.
getting to.
And for those of you who may not know that when the colony of Maryland was created out of Great Britain, of course, Great Britain after Henry VIII had gone to the Anglican Church, but King Charles, it was Anglican, he gave a land grant to the Lords Baltimore, which are the Colbert family. And the Lords Baltimore came to Maryland as a allegedly Catholic colony. Of course, that got changed. So many Protestants came in and outlawed Catholicism in the Catholic colony, but the Catholics persevered. And the Quanders were Catholic. We don't know if we were Catholic as far back as the 1680s from the enslaver, but the Maryland Quanders on the Maryland side were largely Catholic, and those on the Virginia side, which came out of the Maryland group, were largely Baptist, because Maryland was a Protestant, Virginia was a Protestant colony, and they had a lot Anglican, but the blacks tended towards being Baptist. But we have only about 4% of African Americans are Catholic, but Maryland being a Catholic colony, the Jesuits were there, the Carroll family, the Culverts, a lot of other families were Catholic, and their enslaved followed the religion for the most part. And then when they went down to several of our family, when the Georgetown College, now university, sold off several of their enslaved people in the 1870s, 1830s, down to Louisiana and Mississippi, there's very strong Catholicism down there too. So a lot of the Quanders who are Catholic up here in the D.C. area uh, probably held on to their Catholicism when they went south. We are now looking to find them because that's 150, almost 200 years ago, and they've lost the name. But we are looking actively to try to connect to let those people know that we have found them. And some of them, we had lines up to about 35 years ago that the name was still there, but we haven't found it. But we do have a couple of professionals looking for them right now. Yeah.
So, Ro, we're going to take a pause so David can invite people to ask their questions, and for those who have to leave at 5 o'clock can. But Sarah Beth, do we have questions? David, do we have questions?
Nothing here in the chat yet.
I think David has a question.
You're putting me on the spot.
Well, Asa has a question. You can defer your time to the great man from Nebraska or from Kansas, one of those people.
Kansas City, Missouri. Close. Yeah, thank you so much. I am curious, this is kind of going back to the research piece where we started. I am a research librarian, so that's where my mind tends to go. But I'm curious, in talking about the oral histories that you had heard from your family growing up, or just that were passed down, if there were things that where the written record and the oral tradition were at odds in any way, and whether how you've found ways to deal with that discrepancy of maybe family lore versus what you're seeing in the kind of written records, which also may not be trustworthy in a way.
Well, there's no unified single way of doing this. The traditions that have come out of Africa, which are oral histories that have been passed down for generations, I would say was much more concentrated because writing was not available for many of them at the early stages. So a lot of what they passed down, they passed down very carefully, whereas here in this country it was not necessarily held on to as tightly. So my research was focused on trying to verify as much as I could find. And in the process, I was able to verify a number of things. I was able to find, regretfully, some things that didn't appear to be accurate. And so you verify things, and you find things that are not that way. And then also you can supplement. They may have told you that it was such and such a thing, and you may look a little further. As you go, you find out, well, it wasn't quite such and such, but it was so and so, but the base is still true. I don't like to disprove things, but some things we actually can't prove. So when I wrote my book, I have a couple spots where I say it was asserted that so and so happened. However, we haven't been able to verify. So we put it there as a possibility. Somebody else may find something later that ties it in. And we don't put it down as a yes. We put it down as they say, a definite maybe. Yeah. There are a lot of stories about people in the history that got into trouble with the law, and what the true circumstance was may not, well, probably is known somewhere. But at the time that I was writing, I didn't have resources to go dig out some of this, or could not find it. So we would say that it was alleged that this happened, it was alleged that that happened, but it was also disputed because there were differences of opinion as to what really happened. So you lay it out on both sides. And I think that's a good professional way of doing it. I'm not a professional historian. And of course, if I were, perhaps I would have dug even deeper and then might have abandoned something, or may actually have been able to prove it. But that's where I had to leave it. Yeah.
Well, given new technology that's certainly been used by people like Henry Louis Gates, have you guys gone back to reinforce or to rediscover some of those questions that you might have?
I have not gone back because I'm very busy with so many other things. And I have been satisfied with where I am. I did try, but you can't always get much response. Try to reach out to Henry Louis Gates. He has so many things on his plate, he didn't pick up on it. So I just have to let that go. I had the opportunity of being with him casually, and I even have a picture of him in one of my books, Martha's Vineyard. But I don't have any ongoing connection with him. And at my age and trying to attend to these other things, some things you have to let go. And I'm concentrating on family reunions and things of that, and relying upon what we have at this point, because it's so substantial compared to most everybody else in the country. We even have 4 Quanders streets right here in the area. I just want to show this. 1 Quanders Street in D.C., the first one from the 1880s. Then we have 1 in Fairfax County, Virginia, 1 in Prince William County, Virginia, and in Prince George's County, we have 1. So we have 4. So no other family around here, in fact, almost nobody has a street named after an African American in Washington, D.C., not including people like Martin Luther King. But there were no streets named after Black people in the 1880s in Washington, D.C., believe me. So we were very gratified that we have such.
And that's quite a tribute. Sarah Beth, you have a question?
I think your leadership shows in so many ways, Judge Quander, and I'm curious, thinking about Gates and what he has done to bring the history to people who are ancestors, descendants. Were there some moments uncovering some of this for you that were like the moments that people have on that show where they're just shocked and surprised? And I think of like how much leadership skill and care for the community must have been in your family to get you to where you are. But I'm curious how those two things are intertwined for you.
Well, let me say this, and this is nothing to tear down or negative towards Henry Louis Gates, but he's in theatrics. And of course, a lot of that is drama. I know that people act so surprised, but before they act so surprised, they've been filmed and trained as to what they're about to get. So we've had moments that have been revealing, yes, but nothing as that we reacted to as dramatically as you see on the screen, where they got to do this so they can come back next week and continue to get new sponsors. So we have focused. I am right now have a person who's approached me as a literary agent that wants to move forward. I just talked to her this afternoon, and to take this to another level, because there may be, I'm not saying it will be, but there may be an interest in turning this towards a screenplay, which may become some type of a documentary. But that's too far away and no commitment of any kind. Getting a book published and keeping it on the market is not an easy thing. But the subject matter of this story is something that has a lot of legs and is constantly a subject of great continuing interest. And I'm blessed to have been born into this situation. And even though some people say I'm quote unquote obsessed, say no, this is my life's work. If you may call it obsession if you want to, but it's my life's work.
I don't think about it as obsession. I do think about it as your strong curiosity that is really just so much a part of learning all of this history. And I thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
And in the Black community, if we don't tell our stories, no one will. David.
A couple of things. One, thank you again for being with us, Judge Quander. And just to let those gathered know that we formally close up shop at around 5 o'clock Pacific time for messy conversations. But if you have a few minutes, we'd love to continue talking with you informally.
I certainly do.
That would be lovely. If you do have to leave us, remember that we don't have Messy next week, but we'll be back in 2 weeks to talk about Afro-womanism and Black feminism. And then, Judge Quander, one of the books that I use in one of my classes is by Saidiya Hartman, the Beautiful Beautiful Lives. I'm messing it up now. Wayward Experiments, or Wayward Lives. That's it. Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments. And I don't know if you know the book, but she's a historian who's interested in the lives of young Black women at the beginning of the 21st century, and who had migrated, especially in the Philadelphia, New York area, who had often migrated from the South, and then found new forms of economic trouble, if you will, in the North. And we don't have much in the way of records on these women, maybe an arrest record or the name in a ledger somewhere or something. And so she invented this methodology that she called critical fabulations. And where in order to tell the stories of these women, she found whatever research records and so on, data that she could, but then she constructed stories of their lives and brought them to life. It's a really powerful, powerful book. Students respond to it. I just wonder, in your work, as you construct the lives of your family and ancestors, if you've dabbled in some critical fabulation yourself.
Well, that's a very interesting story, and I will parallel myself with Roots, because Roots basically is a fiction based on very slender facts in some respects. When he was writing the book Roots, he admitted himself that much of it was based upon a very slender thread, and being the writer he was able to develop it into something. But I made the conscious decision not to try to enhance it into faction, as we call it, facts and fiction. So my stories are based very strongly upon documented facts and plenty of footnotes. And And of course, in the process, while having Dr. Bernice Johnson Regan's interviews, and when she was doing this at the American History Museum, and my interviews, because the 41 interviews, 810 or so pages, there was a lot to write that was based on what really did happen. Plus, there were a lot of newspaper articles that had come through the time. So the book could have been much larger if I had tried to fictionalize some of it or enhance some of it to say, well, we suppose it was this or it might have been that. But I consciously stayed on track because I knew if somebody might want to go and dig into the record and find the actual source that this or that or the other thing came from. But the literary agent that I mentioned, I'm not mentioning her name, but the literary agent seems to feel that there's enough basic story here to certainly be able to enhance it into a full screenplay that could become, not going to say a full movie, but some type of a production. I'm not going to get myself all excited about that because I'm not about money. I'm about truth and knowledge and being aware that of our history as African Americans. I go all over I won't say all over the country, I will if invited, but I do a lot of Zoom work and I do go to other people. I've got other conversations coming up before the end of February and into other months where I am trying to encourage African Americans to realize everybody has a history. And don't say I can't do it because what you did, I can't do anything like that. If grandma's still alive, she knows something. And their church records somewhere, school records, somebody turned over their archives to the local university or whatever it might be. You can find something. There is something. I tell people, they talk about my heroes and sheroes, bring your heroes home. Your heroes and sheroes can be right there in your home household. They don't even happen to be a relative. It could be a family friend who knows something. And you can build on that. And that's what it's all about.
And as we mentioned earlier about the churches, oftentimes, some families kept the family Bible, which often had information in it. And, maybe it wasn't a practice early on, like in some of the articles written about your family, it talks about the journals that were kept by some of the slave owners. But, through time, I'm sure that there are Black families who have certain things that are, my family has painstakingly written the history of our family for as far back as we can gather information. But because, a lot of it was oral, there's really no documentation thereof.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Cousin Susie Quander, who's Nellie Quander's sister, she would just say, well, if you know the geographical area here from Alexandria, Virginia down to Mount Vernon, it's about 12 or 13 miles. Oh, my grandfather, he was a logger and he helped to clear the road to Mount Vernon. Well, that's just one little factoid. So what did I do? I went into more detail. I contacted people. He was born free, actually. It turned out, yes, he was a logger, but in addition to being a logger, he also worked for pay at Woodlawn Plantation, which was where George Washington's stepdaughter, Martha Washington's granddaughter, Nellie Lewis, owned that property. And it turns out that he, talk about Lewis Quander, he helped to clear the road that eventually became the first railroad to go from Alexandria down to George Washington's plantation. And today, when you go on Mount Vernon Highway, which is the actual driving vehicle road, the railroad tracks have been replaced by a highway. I can say openly that ancestor Lewis Quander was involved in clearing the road, the logs that, and working as a free man, earning money and owning a significant amount of acreage in the area. So the story grew out of a little factoid. And I don't know if she ever did anything to verify that, but what she was just passing it down turned out to be absolutely correct. And we were able to build more on that into acreage and into contributions up to the current time. So that's just a little example. There are other examples of that too. Yeah.
I want to jump back to something that's also in the materials about your family, and you've also mentioned it to us offline, about George Washington himself, how, because I guess of the interaction with the enslaved people, he decided that maybe slavery wasn't a good idea. And as you mentioned, he had made provisions to free them with conditions in his will. I just really want you to speak on that for just a quick second.
Surely. Well, when
The
George
turning,
Washington, go ahead.
his turning point when he
Okay, George
made that.
Washington's turning point, it was a slow turning point. He witnessed the courage and ingenuity and focus of the Black troops during the American Revolutionary War. Of course, that was in the 1770s. And he began to have a different attitude. Martha did not apparently share that attitude. She felt that they were hers and they're mine, and I'm not giving them up. But he slowly realized that, and he gave some of the Black enslaved there a little more responsibility. But let's not think for 1 minute that he was bordering on being a liberal by any means. But when he wrote his will, which he wrote in 1899, providing for the eventual freedom, and he said they would be free, but the ability to leave was postponed until Martha's death. Now, he had tried to get some of the other enslavers, including Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison, to free their enslaved altogether, them and him too, and they refused to do it. So he decided to put it in his will that they would be freed upon Martha's death. So he was making that provision. So when he died, December 14th, 1799, they knew that they were going to get their freedom. But Martha, of course, was still alive, but she was deathly afraid they were going to kill her. That's recorded in writing. So she announced on the anniversary, December the 14th, 1800, that they could leave on January 1st, 1801, and they were released. Those who were George Washington's got their freedom. Those who were under Martha Washington's dower were returned to the Custis family. They did not get theirs. So George Washington was a man of his time, and I often say he was great, but he would have been greater if he just freed them outright and didn't wait till he didn't need them anymore, which is what he did. So we take it when we got it, but it should have been, he would have been greater if he'd given it earlier. I'm a consultant at Mount Vernon right now, and I have a meeting, had one early today and another one tomorrow, where I work with them as they're planning a new exhibit coming up on George Washington's life, which will coincide with the 250th anniversary of the nation next year. And it is a very balanced look at George Washington, probably more balanced than ever before, looking at him in slavery before he was born, even after he died. And my role is, I'm not the only person, is to make sure that every aspect of George Washington's life is properly balanced to include the uncompensated service of men, women, and children who laid the important foundation for who we are today as African Americans, to realize that we are strong people. We've come from something, I mean Quanders, I'm talking about everybody, are very strong. And not only did we build the Mount Vernon as block on block and wood on wood, we also built Washington, D.C., the Capitol, the White House, foundation for the Washington Monument, the first Smithsonian, the original streets. We have many stories to tell. And a lot of people just don't know those stories. So my job as a licensed certified tour guide is to make sure they know that. I mention it every single tour, even I've had pushback telling me, and I'm sorry to say, white people, I don't care about that Negro stuff. I said, wait a minute, this is American history, sir or ma'am. This is not Black history. This is American history. Now, I can't make you listen, and I can't necessarily persuade you. I'm not trying to persuade you. I'm just trying to tell you the truth and let it fall where it does.
As you mentioned Mount Vernon and the exhibition there, is that a permanent exhibition, or are you talking about a new exhibition, or is it the exhibition that was in the materials on our website?
Yeah, the materials on your website is from Lives Bound Together, Slavery, George Washington, Mount Vernon. That exhibit was put there in 2000. Let's see, I forget what year it was now, but it was put there for 2 years. But then COVID came, I guess it was around 2018, but COVID came, so they couldn't take it out. And it ended up being there 5 years. It was so popular and so rich. So now this new exhibit doesn't have a name yet, but we're just calling it Be Washington. And a lot of the interview footage of the enslaved descendant family members will be included in the new exhibit. The new exhibit is going to have 9 different faces of George Washington's life. And the emphasis is upon recognizing that he had 317 enslaved on the date of death, that those who are presented, can't have everybody in there, but those who are presented in some form or fashion, Ona Judge, who was Martha Washington's maid, Hercules, who was the cook, Nancy Carter Quander, who was a spinner making cloth and fabric there, that those people are adequate and accurately represented and portrayed in terms of physical appearance as best we can based upon documents that may say that so-and-so was fair complexion or dark complexion or portly or had very broad shoulders. We're trying to pick that up to make sure that every depiction of every enslaved person is accurate to a T as best we can do it, because this is important for people to see Washington in the context of slavery in every aspect of his life, as I said, before birth and even after death, down to and including the present day.
I know that in the past, some of your relatives actually worked at Mount Vernon. Is that still the case now? Are there
Well,
others serving as docents and
yeah,
different personnel?
yeah, not now, but until quite recently. Cousin Gladys Quander Tansel, I have her slide, but it's not in today's presentation. She worked there for 35 years. She was the first African-American interpreter guide to be at Mount Vernon. Her aunt Cornelia Randall, who was not a Quander by birth, but part of the family under another name, she worked there from 1902, and then Gladys's mother worked there for years. And when Gladys died in 2002, they had had 100 years of those 3 women, 100 years of service, compensated service. And then Frank Holland, who's a cousin, he was a tomb guard there for about 50 years. Tom Quander, who's listed as a landscaper, sometimes when the tomb guard was a little short staff, he did work as a tomb guard. And we have other Quanders who have done. My cousin Jay Quander was the director of food service there for several years. He now has his own restaurant in Alexandria. It's called 1799 Prime. And he picked that name because 1799 was the year of George Washington's death. And Prime is telling you what kind of a restaurant. So he was the director of food service. And I'm a consultant there even now. So the Quander attachment to Mount Vernon continues. And this summer, the second weekend in August, we're going to have our 100th Quander family reunion. And it's going to be in a section of Virginia right near Quander Road. And we will be having some interaction with Mount Vernon during that period of time. So Mount Vernon and George Washington's legacy is still very much a part of the Quander family history, yes.
I'm very curious. You mentioned the term tomb. It was a tomb
Tomb guard.
Tomb guard. Yes,
Yeah,
the word
guarding
guard.
George Washington's tomb. Yeah.
So he's guarding George Washington's tomb as a tomb guard. But what about the graves of the enslaved people?
Well, the graves of enslaved people, the slave cemetery or burial ground is just about 150 feet from where the Washingtons are buried in a mausoleum that was constructed for them. And there are about 30 or so, approximately 30 Washingtons in there. The burial site where the enslaved are, and there are no records because they couldn't read or write, but it's estimated that about 150 formerly enslaved, and then some who came back after their freedom were buried there. It's estimated about 150, 155 were buried there between mid-1750s. And even though they say there were no burials officially, they don't think after about 1830 maybe. It seems as though there were some. And right now we have an ongoing project. We have an organization called the League of the Enslaved, the Mount Vernon Descendants. And our purpose is to highlight the history and contribution of our ancestors. And this organization we founded, they have a parallel one besides at Mount Vernon. They have one at Thomas Jefferson's, Monticello, James Madison's, Montpelier, at Whitney in Louisiana, Middleton in South Carolina, some of the larger ones. And the idea is to showcase the contributions of our ancestors, many of whom are unsung. Because while George Washington was off being the founder of our nation in waging a war of independence, these enslaved were back there planting the crops, weeding, harvesting, running the distilleries, running the fisheries, birthing the babies, burying the dead, doing everything that needed to be done. And as part of this exhibit that's opening next year, we have descendants, myself included, we're using our voices to, when they go to various sites like the wash house, the wharf, the distillery, you have a narration provided by professional staff, and then they have voices of actual people. Like I'm at the wharf with another person, and we're talking about, man, this season for fish is really heavy. My back is aching. I sure be glad when the season's over. And the other one is saying, yeah, better be careful. Don't let that net break and some of the fish fall out. So it's our actual voices. These are the actual voices. And when they go over to the wash house, the women are in the wash house washing, and they're talking about owner Judge. Well, she ran away, Miss Washington's very upset. Well, at least she's free. So this is how we are capturing that, to bring that alive. Bring that alive, yes. That's part of what we're doing as a league.
Well, we want to be kind to your time, so I'd like to ask, are there any other questions for Judge Quander before we release him back for his trip to Mount Vernon tomorrow?
Hi, this is Elaine. I just wanted to, I did the research on the Dunbar the school. I wanted to know two quick things. Has Howard University formed any partnership, or has there been any even historical review or interconnectedness with Dunbar and Howard? That's number one. Number two, some of the information which you are sharing with us, are there any other partnerships or symposiums or workshops with any other universities, historically Black and or others?
Okay, as far as Howard and Dunbar is concerned, Howard and Dunbar are intertwined and has been for a long, long time. Dunbar, the preparatory high school for colored youth, was created in 1871. Howard University was founded in 1867. Almost from the very beginning, the graduates of the preparatory high school, the M Street High School, the Dunbar High School, have had a stream of going to Howard University. And when you look at many of those here in Washington, D.C., who have come through Howard University and gone on to do something with themselves, you look into their educational background and you'll see they were educated at Dunbar High School or one of the predecessor institutions. So that was ongoing. Now, of course, we are in a different phase where more people coming from all over the country and more universities other than Howard available for African Americans. So that legacy is still there, but not as many coming. But of course, those chains are established firmly. Now, as far as other universities and colleges of doing something, right here in Washington, D.C., George Washington University has a very strong connection with African American history and culture. There are a number of things going on around the country. George Washington University, George Washington's namesake university, they have a number of people on staff who focus on various minority groups, particularly African American groups. Georgetown, which has a black eye because of the 272 project, in which they sold off 272 of their enslaved that they were, quote, owning, quote unquote, and breaking up families, etc. They are trying to recover from that Black Eye Now University, and they have set up a very meaningful diaspora group, and those subject to verification can go to Georgetown free tuition. And so right here in Washington, D.C., the University of the District of Columbia has the Institute for Policy, Institute of History, Politics and Policy, and they are reaching out in a number of ways to show the components of some of our nation's leaders. The next one is coming up next week on Ulysses Grant, but they had one on Grant and Frederick Douglass earlier, late last year. So the universities in this area are reaching out, and of course, I would hope that that some of the universities, in fact, I know they are. Tulane and is doing a lot. And as far as HBCU schools are concerned, I'm not as well aware as what some of them are doing, but I'm focusing on my own, which is Howard University. Plus, for being here, last weekend I was in a forum on justice, Healing Justice Forum. Here it is right here. And I was a presenter, and we were dealing with slavery in Prince George's County. And of those corners, the largest group of those enslaved sold off from Prince George's County came from Georgetown College's effort. So we were there stirring that in. And later this month, the 1856 Project, University of Maryland, that's the year they were founded, they're having a major seminar on slavery in the state of Maryland. And I will be a guest at that particular, I don't know if I'll be a presenter, but I'll be a guest there. So it is going on. And what we need to do is have more of it. And Smithsonian is working with the National Trust for Historic Preservation to look at African-American historic sites. We're talking about buildings and structures to try to preserve and restore as many as we can. And I might be going, we have to see, to the national conference in South Carolina, which is in July. So we'll see. I've got it on my calendar.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. And I am very aware and sensitive to your time. And thank you once again.
Thank you. Well, it's been my pleasure and to be able to help you, to enlighten. If anybody wants to reach out to me with a question or anything, you can just send me an email. I'll be delighted to respond. It's in the chat, but I'll repeat it again. rquander@aol.com. If you're interested in knowing about my 4 books, I'll gladly send you an order form. The order form has a quick synopsis on each of the 4 books, as well as the opportunity to obtain an autographed copy. So it's my pleasure, Clarence, to be able to be with the Antioch community again. And so I wish everybody well, and thanks again.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, and good luck tomorrow at Mount Vernon.
Yeah, well,
Tell them we said hello.
Supposed to snow, but I hope we get back before that happens if it does snow. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.